A lot of people could be forgiven for thinking the country's in a blinking mess. What's going on?
Yeah, I think they'd be right. Especially with the travel chaos. If you think that this is the first time that everybody wants to go abroad since the pandemic, and now you can't get through Dover to go over to the continent. You've got problems on the motorways because of protests, and we still haven't solved the air chaos. So
nor the railways.
And the railways were about to have a load more strikes, yeah. So moving about anywhere is actually proving really difficult.
It is, and yeah, interesting. We're talking to a former sort of border control fella in the last hour who said, look, yes, this is what's happening at Dover is problematic, but it's not unusual. This is the busiest weekend of the year. There are always problems this weekend.
Yeah, but the whole thing is they should have been prepared for. So you have got...
But isn't that the French...
That is the French problem. The French are on this side. They should be processing passports. Given that they now have to actually look at passports where they didn't prior to Brexit and give them a stamp, what they should be doing is they should have manned those booths properly. It wasn't acceptable on Friday to have half the number of people that you need to process people through. So yes, there's a problem there with France and the staffing. Obviously, it is going to be delayed a bit more anyway because you have to pass through more paperwork to actually go abroad.
But you see, even difficulties on the French side, as it were, whether they were deliberate or not, should have been anticipated by us, knowing that we'd gone through Brexit. For Boris to say he's delivered Brexit, well, yeah, he might think he has, but he should try queuing up to get out of Dover. If we came up with the system, we should have come up with a better system than this. Which fell at the first hurdle.
But the whole thing is that you still got to actually have your passport processed by the French to get into France in the first instance. So there's not much our lot can do about that. They can process through the first bit as you leave, but then the French have got to come in and deal with it.
Now, I know you're no great fan of the government. Should we put it?
Put it mildly.
Yeah, OK. But the problem is this all piles pressure on the government, doesn't it? And it's not necessarily the government's fault. Certainly when it comes to the airports, that seems to be a failing of the airports and the airlines into how that's being managed. The strikes, well, there's a momentum for strikes at the moment, isn't it? They've smelt blood in the water, and so a lot of these unions are gathering momentum on that. That's not actually necessarily the government's fault either, is it?
I think that we have to sort of divide the two things there. One is about pay, and yes, the government probably are at fault at that. I'd like to blame the government for everything, but I don't think travel chaos is something that they can be blamed for, especially at the airports, where it was getting rid of staff during the pandemic, and now we're trying to rehire them. They always knew that things would get back to normal, and the airport bosses were slow about doing that. When it comes to what is going on with strikes, I think that the government kind of promised a better tomorrow as we came out of the pandemic. So without actually being specific about pay rises, part of that was that people would have a decent uplift once the pandemic was over. That's not happened. Now
it's not happened because we've hit this economic turmoil, whoever's fault that is, though it is a global event. The fact that unions are now turning around, and it's not just the trains, is it? It's doctors, nurses, examiners, lawyers, post office workers. Yeah. That they want, they want their 5% or whatever, plus inflation. Well, that cannot be delivered. No government could actually deliver that.
No. The situation, obviously, inflation running at 9% at the moment, probably will go up to 11% at the end of the year. People are considerably worse off because of that. So what I think you should end up with is realistic pay settlements. Now, you're absolutely right. If you give inflationary or above inflationary wage settlements, that will fuel the cost of living crisis. However, what you can do is not just offer these 3% here and there, and it applies both to the public and the private sector. I would like to see something in the middle where, if you like, both sides bear the brunt of it. Say 5-6% wage settlements. That wouldn't be too inflationary.
But they're getting offered that. A lot of these people are being offered 5.5% pay rises, and they're still voting to go on strike.
Well, it's a matter of for the individual sectors if they're going to do that. But when you actually look down at the pay increases that have been offered so far, it's not quite as simple as that. That an average might be, say, 4.5%, but certain areas are getting less. So it's not an across-the-board rise. The other thing is, take, for instance, teachers' pay. At the moment, they're going to have to fund that through cuts in their own schools, and that causes a problem. So things are a bit more complex than they first seem from the figures.